The envelope was the kind they only use for weddings and funerals. Heavy cardstock, ivory with a faint linen texture, my name written by hand in my mother's neat cursive. I recognized her handwriting before I even turned it over. She'd always had beautiful penmanship, one of those things she was quietly proud of. Inside was a formal printed invitation to my sister Brianna's engagement party, the Whitmore estate, 7 o'clock, cocktail attire, and tucked behind it, a separate note card, same ivory, same cursive. Natalie, this is an important evening for Brianna and the Caldwell family. Please dress like you actually care. We know your situation is difficult right now, but if you can't put in the effort, it's okay to sit this one out. No one will be upset. My mother's name, Sandra, signed at the bottom with a little flourish on the S. I read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee and sat down. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own family? Like every room you walk into, someone's already decided how much space you're allowed to take up. Tell me your story in the comments. I'd genuinely love to know I'm not the only one who's felt this way. I didn't cry over that note card. I didn't even feel the specific sting I would have expected. What I felt was something quieter and more familiar, a kind of weary recognition. Like when you've heard the same song so many times you stop really listening. My daughter Zoe was sitting at the kitchen table behind me, 6 years old, eating cereal and watching a cartoon on her tablet, completely unbothered by the universe. Her dark hair was in 2 uneven pigtails because she'd done them herself that morning and refused my help. She had a smear of strawberry jam on her chin. I watched her for a moment. Then I picked up my phone. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright in that particular way it gets when she's bracing for something. Natalie, sweetheart, did you get Brianna's invitation? I got it, I said. Good. So you saw everything. Listen, honey, and here the brightness dimmed slightly, replaced by something practiced, rehearsed, like she'd been standing in front of a mirror with this speech. Brianna's been seeing Tyler for almost 2 years now, and his family, the Caldwells. They're very established. Old money, very traditional. His mother, Patricia, is on the board of 3 different charities. They take appearances very seriously. And we just think, given your circumstances, you being a single mom, working your schedule, not really having the time or the budget to put together something appropriate, it might be easier for everyone if you just skip this one. Brianna would understand. She really would. I was quiet for a few seconds. You're telling me not to come to my sister's engagement party. We're not telling you not to come. We're suggesting. Natalie, please don't make this into something it isn't. We just don't want you to feel out of place. She meant we don't want you to embarrass us in front of the Caldwells. I understand completely, I said. I meant it. I hung up, set the phone down on the counter, and sat in my kitchen for approximately 4 minutes. Then I opened my laptop. Here's the thing about my family's understanding of my life. It was about 4 years out of date and built almost entirely on assumptions. They knew I'd dropped out of my MBA program when Zoe's father left. They knew I'd taken a salaried position at a consulting firm to pay the bills. They sent me articles about financial literacy and asked if I was keeping my head above water at Christmas. My mother occasionally Venmoed me $50 just in case with a heart emoji. What they did not know, because I had never corrected them, because there never seemed to be a right moment, because their version of me had calcified so completely that I'd stopped trying to chip at it, was that I had spent the last 4 years becoming very good at my actual job. I was not a salaried employee at a consulting firm anymore. I was the vice president of strategic partnerships at Meridian Group, a corporate real estate investment firm with holdings across 11 states. I'd been promoted twice in 3 years. I managed a team of 14. My base salary was $310,000, and last year my bonus alone had been more than my mother made in a decade working at the county assessor's office. I drove a 6-year-old Honda Civic to family events because the question of why I'd bought a house in a good school district was one I wasn't ready to have. Zoe's college fund had more in it than my parents' retirement account. I knew this because my father had mentioned the number once, and I'd done the math. But in my family's narrative, I was the cautionary tale. Brianna was the success story. Med school, beautiful apartment, now engaged to the son of a real estate developer with offices in 4 states. The son of a real estate developer. I pulled up my work email and found the thread I was thinking of. Tyler Caldwell. The Caldwell Group. Yes, I'd met Tyler exactly once at an industry conference in Chicago 14 months ago. He'd been perfectly pleasant. We talked for about 20 minutes about commercial zoning before he moved on to another conversation. He would not have remembered my name. But I knew his father, Warren Caldwell, fairly well. Our firms had been in quiet negotiations for months over a joint acquisition in the Denver market. The deal was in its final stages. Warren's signature and mine were going on those documents within the next 30 days. I thought about this for a long moment. Then I called Warren. He picked up on the third ring. Natalie, I was just thinking about you. Are we still on for the Henderson review next week? We are, I said. I'm actually calling about something slightly different. I just found out my sister Brianna is engaged to your son Tyler. A pause. Then a warm, genuine laugh. You're kidding me. Sandra Morrison's daughter? Brianna is your sister? She is. Well, isn't that something? Small world. Smaller than I thought, I said. They're having an engagement party on the 14th. I was wondering, and feel free to say no, whether you and Catherine might be interested in attending. I'd like you to finally meet the family, and it would give me a chance to introduce Zoe to everyone properly. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him smiling. Natalie, we would be honored. Tyler's been wanting us to meet Brianna's people for months. Catherine will be thrilled. Wonderful, I said. I'll coordinate the details with you this week. I closed my laptop with a soft click. I looked at Zoe, who had finished her cereal and was now drawing something on a paper bag with a blue marker. Hey, Bug, I said. We're going to a party? She looked up. Is there going to be cake? Almost certainly. Okay, she said, and went back to her drawing. The week before the party, I operated with a kind of focused calm that I recognized from the best stretches of my professional life. I didn't overthink it. I didn't rehearse speeches. I just did the work. I called a stylist, not because I needed someone to dress me, but because I had a full week of meetings and a 10-page contract review, and a 6-year-old who needed help with her spelling homework, and I didn't have time to also manage a wardrobe decision. Sarah, who I'd worked with twice before for client events, brought over 4 options. I picked a deep navy midi dress that I'd have described to my mother as just something I already had. It was not something I already had. It was elegant in the specific way that doesn't announce itself. I did not tell anyone I was coming. Brianna texted me the Thursday before. Hey, so Mom mentioned you might not be able to make it? No worries either way, just let me know for the head count level. I texted back, I'll be there. See you Saturday. She sent a thumbs up emoji and a heart. That was the extent of our communication. The Whitmore Estate was the kind of venue that existed specifically to make people feel like the occasion was historic. White columns, ivy on the brick, a circular gravel drive with a valet. 40-something guests milling around with champagne in rooms with 15-foot ceilings. My mother had a gift for finding locations that communicated aspiration more effectively than anything else about the evening. I arrived with Zoe at 7:15. Zoe was wearing a dark green velvet dress she'd chosen herself. She called it her fancy leaf dress, and small gold stud earrings. She had insisted on wearing her light-up sneakers underneath, and I had decided that was fine. Warren and Catherine Caldwell arrived 5 minutes after I did. I saw them cross the foyer and waved. Catherine, warm, silver-haired, wearing a champagne silk blouse, came directly over and hugged me like we'd known each other for years, which in the way that matters professionally, we had. This must be Zoe, she said, crouching slightly to Zoe's level. Your mom has told us about you. Zoe assessed her solemnly for a moment. I like your earrings, she said. Catherine beamed. And I love your sneakers. Warren shook my hand, then looked around the room with the unhurried gaze of a man who was comfortable in most rooms. So which ones are the Morrisons? You'll know shortly, I said. The way a party like this works is that there's always a moment when the guest of honor's family makes their entrance. Not a formal entrance, just the natural gathering of the core people around the center of the room. My mother orchestrated these things without appearing to orchestrate them. She'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of the casual arrangement. Brianna looked genuinely beautiful. She was wearing a pale gold dress and her dark hair was up. And she was laughing at something Tyler was saying, and for a second I just watched her and felt something uncomplicated. My little sister was happy. That was real, whatever else was happening around it. Tyler spotted his parents across the room and steered Brianna over, which meant the whole group converged roughly 6 feet from where I was standing. I watched the exact sequence of recognitions happen in slow motion. Tyler saw his parents. Then he saw me standing next to them. His expression did a very specific thing, a rapid recalibration, like a GPS rerouting. Brianna looked at me, then at Warren and Catherine, then back at me, and said with genuine bewilderment, "Natalie, do you know the Caldwells?" "We work together," I said simply. "Warren, Catherine, this is my sister Brianna." Warren smiled warmly and shook Brianna's hand. "We've heard so much about you. Tyler talks about you constantly. And your sister, I have to say, Natalie is one of the sharpest people I work with. You must be very proud of her." Brianna stared at him. My mother materialized at Brianna's shoulder, the way she always did at events, appearing without seeming to have walked from anywhere, and stopped when she registered what she was seeing. Her face went through something complicated. She looked at Warren Caldwell, whose name she'd been repeating reverently for months as Tyler's father, the developer. Then at me. Then back at Warren. "You know Natalie," she said. The brightness in her voice was performing at maximum capacity, trying to paper over the confusion underneath. "We've been working together for almost 2 years now," Warren said. "She runs partnerships at Meridian. Honestly, Sandra, you have an extraordinary daughter. The deal she put together last fall, I told my whole board about it." My mother's smile didn't waver, but behind it something shifted. I could see her recalculating, running the numbers, trying to figure out when exactly the version of me she was carrying around had stopped corresponding to anything real. My stepfather Dale appeared then, drink in hand, looking jovial and slightly confused. He looked at me in my navy dress, then at Warren Caldwell, then at Catherine, and said, "Wait, I thought Natalie couldn't make it?" "Natalie," my mother said, her voice dropping slightly below the party noise, "what is going on?" "I came to my sister's engagement party," I said pleasantly. Like I said I would. Tyler, to his significant credit, stepped in smoothly. "Mom, Dad, can I get you something to drink? The bar's great." He steered them gently away, giving Brianna and my mother a moment. Brianna looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. Something genuinely uncertain. "How do you know Warren Caldwell?" "Work," I said. "We've been in talks on a joint acquisition for months. It closes next month. Our firms are going to be partners." She absorbed this. "What firm do you work for?" "Meridian Group. I'm the VP of Strategic Partnerships." Silence. "Mom said you were at a consulting agency." I was. 4 years ago. Things changed. My mother had been listening to all of this. Her expression had traveled somewhere past surprise and was now hovering in a quieter place. Something that looked, underneath the composure, like a beginning of understanding. Or maybe just the beginning of realizing how much she hadn't known. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. And her voice, for the first time in the conversation, didn't have a performance behind it. It was just a question. I thought about how to answer that. I didn't want to give a speech. I wasn't there for a confrontation. I hadn't engineered this moment to produce an apology I didn't need anymore. "You sent me a note card telling me not to come tonight because you thought I couldn't afford a dress," I said. Quietly, not cruelly. Just directly. And that wasn't the first time. It was just the most recent. After a while I stopped correcting the story because it didn't seem like anyone was interested in the actual version. My mother opened her mouth. Closed it. "I'm not here to make tonight difficult," I said. "I'm here because Brianna is my sister and I love her and she's engaged and that's worth showing up for. That's the only reason." Dale put his arm around my mother's shoulders. He had the slightly chastened look of a man who understood more of what had just been said than he was letting on. Zoe appeared at my elbow then, as she tends to do, tugging my sleeve. "Mom, Catherine said there's a chocolate fountain. Can I go look at it?" I looked down at her. Her light-up sneakers were blinking slowly in the dim light of the foyer. "Yes," I said. "Stay where I can see you." She took off toward the dessert table. The gathering around us had thinned slightly, the way people drift when they sense a private moment, but not entirely. A few of my aunts were within earshot, a cousin or two. Word would circulate, as it always does of these things. Warren found me again an hour later near the window overlooking the garden. Zoe was sitting at a table with Catherine and Tyler's younger sister, deeply involved in a coloring activity that Catherine had apparently conjured from somewhere. "Your daughter is wonderful," he said. "She is. She told Catherine she's going to be a marine biologist or possibly a dog." I laughed. It was a real laugh. "She's been saying that for 2 years. I've stopped questioning it." He swirled his drink. "You know, I've always wondered why you were so understated at those industry events. Never pushed. Never told anyone who you were or what you'd built." "It never seemed necessary," I said. He nodded slowly. "Your family didn't know." It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. They had a version of me that was easier for them to manage. I stopped fighting it. He was quiet for a moment. "Well, they know now." "They know now," I agreed. Brianna found me near the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned and the caterers were quietly beginning their work. She touched my arm, and I turned. She looked different than she had at the start of the evening. Still beautiful, still wearing the gold dress. But something in her face was more open, less curated. "I'm really glad you came," she said. "Of course I came. I want you to know I didn't put Mom up to the note card thing. I found out after, and I was mortified. I studied her face. She was telling the truth." "I know," I said. And I did know. Brianna had her own particular weaknesses, but she wasn't calculating in the way our mother was. She just followed the path of least resistance, which in our family had always run through Sandra Morrison's preferences. "I didn't know about any of it," she said. "The job? Any of it." "You never said anything." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." She didn't ask why, which was more perceptive than I expected. Maybe she already knew the answer. "Well," she said, "I'm proud of you." "Is that a weird thing to say?" "A little," I said. "But I'll take it." She laughed, which was the same laugh she'd had at 8 years old. Sudden, a little undignified, completely genuine. I'd always liked that laugh. We stood together for a moment looking out at the garden. "Tyler's great," I said. "I only met him once, but he seemed genuinely good." "He is," she said, and the way she said it, simple, certain, without any performance, told me everything I needed to know about whether she was happy. She was. "Then that's what matters," I said. The drive home was quiet in the way that good endings are quiet. Zoe fell asleep in the back seat before we hit the highway, chocolate fountain evidence still faintly visible near her left ear. The city light slid past the windows. I had the radio on low. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had 14 text messages. 3 from cousins, 2 from aunts, 1 from my stepfather Dale, which just said, "Wow, Nat. Wow." And a long one from my mother that I read in the car while Zoe slept. She'd written, "Natalie, I have been sitting here for an hour trying to figure out what to say. I don't know when things went so wrong between us or when I started assuming I knew what your life was instead of asking. Warren Caldwell told your stepfather tonight that you were the most capable person he'd worked with in 20 years. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I have always been proud of you. I think I showed it in the worst possible ways. I would like to do better if you'll let me." I sat with that for a while. My mother was not a villain. This was the complicated thing. The thing that revenge stories never quite figure out what to do with. She was a woman who had spent her whole life ordering the world into categories that made sense to her. And I had disrupted that order in a way she hadn't known how to process. She'd made herself feel better about my absence from the approved narrative by deciding the absence was my failure rather than her limitation. She'd been doing it so long she'd stopped noticing she was doing it. None of that made the note card okay. None of it erased the years of small exclusions, the sighs, the just suggestions, the cropped-out sense of not quite belonging. But it also wasn't nothing. I didn't write back that night. I tucked my phone into my bag, got out of the car, lifted Zoe out of her car seat. She stirred but didn't wake, her head falling against my shoulder, her fancy leaf dress slightly wrinkled, her light-up sneakers going dark, and carried her inside and upstairs and laid her in her bed. She smelled like chocolate and kid shampoo. I smoothed her hair back from her forehead and sat on the edge of her bed for a moment in the dark. She'd spent the last hour of the party coloring with Warren Caldwell and had announced on the way to the car that Warren was her second favorite adult she'd met at a party, behind only the woman in Denver who'd had a dog in her purse. High praise. She had no idea that the evening had been anything other than a nice party with a chocolate fountain and a coloring activity. No idea about the noter card, the phone call, the years of quiet erasure. She just knew her mom had worn a nice dress and they'd had fun. I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. But I also knew, sitting there in the dark, that the story I was going to eventually tell her wasn't one about revenge. It wasn't about exposing anyone or making anyone feel small or winning something. The story I would tell her was simpler than that. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to perform your worth for people who've already decided what you're worth. You build the thing. You do the work. You show up, not to prove anything, but because the people you love are there, and that's reason enough. And sometimes the world just arranges itself in a way where the truth becomes visible on its own. That's not revenge. That's just time and patience and knowing who you are when nobody's watching. I wrote back to my mother 3 days later. It was a short message. I said I appreciated what she'd written, that I didn't need an apology as much as I needed a different kind of conversation going forward, and that I was open to having it. I said I'd bring Zoe over the following Sunday if she wanted to see her. She called me 40 seconds after the message delivered. She was crying before I said hello. We talked for an hour. It was not a complete repair. It was not a movie ending. There were things said and unsaid that were going to take a long time, maybe forever, to fully settle. But it was a real conversation, the first one we'd had in years, where neither of us was performing a role the other had assigned. I counted that. The Caldwell-Morrison wedding was the following spring. I was a bridesmaid. Warren walked me down the aisle after Brianna and Tyler exchanged vows and whispered, "You know, when we close this Denver deal, people are going to figure out pretty quickly that you're the one who made it happen." "That's fine," I said. "You're not going to be invisible much longer." I looked across the room at Zoe, sitting in the front row between my mother and Warren Caldwell, wearing a pale yellow dress and her light-up sneakers. I had tried to negotiate this and failed, very seriously, holding the flower basket in her lap like it was a responsibility she took personally. "I was never invisible," I said. "I was just quiet." He smiled. "There's a difference," I said. And there was. I've thought a lot about what that night actually was. Not in the dramatic way. Not the version where I'm standing in a spotlight while everyone realizes they were wrong about me. The real version was quieter than that. It was Warren saying something kind, my mother's face doing that complicated thing it did, and Zoe eating chocolate fondue completely unbothered by all of it. What I keep coming back to is this: the nota card my mother sent didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of me letting a false version of myself exist in their minds without correcting it. I thought silence was dignity. And in some ways it was. But silence also lets other people fill in the blanks. And the blanks my family filled in were not generous ones. That was on me, at least partially. Not the cruelty of the assumption, that belongs to them. But the gap between who I actually was and what they believed. I let that grow. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument. I told myself that people who'd already decided something couldn't be changed by facts. Maybe that was even true. But it was also a way of protecting myself that had a cost I hadn't fully counted. There's something I want to say about what it takes to build a life that nobody sees coming. It isn't dramatic. It isn't a training montage. It's years of Tuesday mornings when you're tired and the work is hard and your daughter needs help with her spelling homework and the report is due and you just do it anyway because the alternative is giving the people who wrote you off the satisfaction of being right. That's not heroism. That's just stubbornness with a good outcome. Natalie didn't become who she was because she wanted to prove something to her family. She became who she was because she had a daughter to raise and a job to do and she was good at it. The proof part. That came later, almost accidentally, because the world is not as large as it seems and the work you do quietly has a way of becoming visible eventually, whether you intend it to or not. That's the thing about integrity that nobody tells you. It doesn't protect you from being underestimated. People will still misjudge you, still write you off, still send you nota cards telling you not to come. But it means that when the moment arrives, and it does arrive, Eventually, in one form or another, you don't have to scramble. You just have to show up. The work is already done. My mother and I are not the same as we were before that night. We're not repaired in a neat, finished way, but we're talking. Really talking. And I've learned that sometimes the most honest thing you can do for a relationship is stop performing the version of yourself the other person needs you to be, even if the performance was a comfortable one for both of you. Zoe doesn't know most of this story yet. She knows her mom works hard, and that Warren's wife has great earrings, and that the chocolate fountain at that party was exceptional. That's enough for now, but someday I'll tell her the real version. And what I want her to take from it isn't that she should hide herself to protect against judgment. I want her to understand that you build the life first, with honesty, with effort, with the quiet daily decision to be someone you can actually respect, and the recognition, if it comes at all, is just a side effect, never the goal. The goal is to be able to sit in your own kitchen on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, and know exactly who you are. Everything else follows from that, or it doesn't, and either way, you're still okay.